Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So once again, we have reached the most important month of the year, October. Now, October is the most important month of the year for several reasons, okay? First of all, October is, of course, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It's also, of course, the month that Halloween falls in. So if you care about that sort of thing, then good for you. And of course, the most important reason that won't actually be related to this video, but I still need to mention it here. Another reason why October is such an important month is because it's my birthday month. But that's not the reason why we're here today. Today we're going to be focusing on the fourth reason why October is so key, is so iconic, and that is because it is in fact British Black History Month. Yes, in the UK, Black History Month falls in the month of October, one of the longest months of the year, can I just say, as opposed to in the case of America, where Black History Month falls in February, the shortest month. So today we are going to be continuing on a sort of tradition that I started last year in October, where I tried to highlight and spotlight some perfect films and TV shows for you guys to check out during Black History Month. Now, as I said in last year's video, one of my motivations and one of the key things that I try to do with my channel anyways all throughout the year is spotlighting Black stories, Black talent, Black filmmakers. So there are many videos that I have that kind of feature this anyways, but I like to make Black History Month videos to kind of consolidate that information and make sure that you guys have a direct access point that I can just direct you towards if you want to check out a ton of great content featuring Black talent and focusing on Black stories. And speaking of American Black History Month, I do also have a US Black History Month video. I started that earlier this year in February, and I plan to continue that just as I do with the Black History Month for the UK. And finally, before we get to the main event, I did just want to mention, unfortunately, there are fewer options when it comes to stories that center on Black characters, and also stories and projects that have Black talent at the center of them that are from the UK. That is an issue when it comes to the representation that we have in British media. That is improving every day, but we still have a long way to go. So in comparison to the options that we have for US Black History Month, the UK one is a little tougher, okay? It's a little harder to compile a comprehensive list. This is not a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination, but as I said before, I often feature, projects surrounding Black stories and Black talent and Black filmmakers anyways throughout the year, so you can find those individual projects dotted around on my channel. Or it could be the case where I haven't covered it at all, and in that case I would be so happy for you guys to let me know down in the comments below, and perhaps I could feature it in next year's video. So without further ado, let's get into my recommendations for what you guys should watch this British Black History Month. So for the first one up, we have Rocks. Rocks is a movie from 2019 that centers on the character of Rocks, that is her nickname in the film, and she is a Black teenage girl who's living with her single mother and her younger brother. But her world comes crushing down from under her when she sees one day that her mother has up and disappeared, leaving her with nothing but a note and an envelope full of cash for her to take care of herself and her brother for an unforeseen amount of time. This film follows Rox's journey as she tries to figure out how to take care of herself and her younger brother, who's looking up to her now as like a mother figure. She has no one else in her life who can provide her with this support in the absence of her mother, so she has to take on the role of mother, of sister, of father all at once for this younger boy. And that's not even taking into consideration her own needs. She is a child herself, and she has to take on all of this responsibility and all of this weight. And then you also have the added pressure of social services literally coming to knock on her door, causing her to have to escape her own home, her own sanctuary, and find another place to live in fear that social services will discover her situation and take her brother away from her. So this is just such an extraordinary story for so many reasons. First of all, I will never stop saying I will never stop saying how important it is to have diversity in representation. And I often refer to this as the diversification of representation of Black people. And this basically refers to how the media in the past has stuck to these very narrow-minded stereotypes when it comes to Black representation. And recently, particularly in the last decade, we have seen a shift away from that. And we have seen such a broader scope of representation of Black stories and Black characters. And this is an example of that, in my opinion, spotlighting the experiences of this teenage girl and how she has to take on the responsibility of taking care of her brother in the absence of her mother, while she also has her own needs. She's also a child who's in education herself. I think it's just something that we scarcely see. Now, a lot of people will point to the fact that this is another Black suffering story, and I completely understand the argument that people are tired of seeing Black suffering. I myself struggle sometimes with watching a ton of projects at once that center on Black suffering. Like, I just want to see Black people be happy at times. Like, is that too much to ask? Okay. And that's what I mentioned in my review of Blood and Water, by the way, is that I love the fact that this series is kind of this, you know, fictional, fanciful teenage drama, the likes of which we often see white characters the center of, but there we have these South African Black girls, which I appreciate. But this is representing another side, another aspect of Black female life, especially in teenagehood, that does exist, and I appreciate the fact that this film puts a spotlight on that. And aside from the story itself, I would say another thing that I absolutely loved about this film was the performances. The performances are insane. First of all, it has to be noted that the characters in this film are portrayed by, you know, actresses that aren't really experienced, actresses that were literally plucked off straight from school themselves, so they're not like highly trained actresses, and as a result they feel so real, they feel so authentic. I would say that the actress who portrays Oloshola, aka Rox, her name is Buki Bakrai. I apologize if I mispronounced her name, but she was phenomenal. She was phenomenal. I believe she won the BAFTA for Best Newcomer, the EE Award for Best Newcomer, and like deservedly so. She was incredible. And I would also say another highlight in this cast was definitely Koshar Ali, who portrays Sumaya, her best friend. Stunning performance. She was incredible. Both of them were just so realistic, so believable as these best friends going through these hardships. The way that they would talk, you know, on top of one another, the way that they would interrupt one another, you know, the franticness, the chaos of their discussions as Rox is going through this tricky time. She isn't saying the most polite things. She's being really mean to her friend, and she's really attacking her when her friend is just trying to help her, but it's because of all the stress that she's under, and it's also because she's a child. She's a teenager at the end of the day, and all of these responsibilities that have been enforced upon her doesn't change that. I just think overall Rox is an outstanding look into the life of this Black teenage girl who's really struggling, going through a really hard time, but she finds herself surrounded by people who just want the best for her, people who are willing to support her through thick and thin. Her friendship group is just incredible, and again, because they are portrayed by actresses who aren't really actresses, or at least they weren't at the time, they were just these teenage girls from London, it all feels so real, so authentic, and I feel like that's what really made me feel like I could relate to the story and the characters. Also, can I just say, the boy who plays Emmanuel, Rox's younger brother, is absolutely adorable. Absolutely adorable. Where can I sign some adoption papers? Where can I give me the adoption papers to sign now? So next up on my list is actually a project that I did cover extensively on my channel last year, but it merits a re-mention, and that is Small Axe from Steve McQueen. Now, Small Axe is an interesting anthology series almost. It's basically a collection of these movies made for television that center on the lives of Caribbean people in the UK from about the 1940s 1940s to the 1980s, I would say, perhaps stretching into the 1990s. But it centers on various topics from policing to the education system during that time and how it impacted these immigrants from the Caribbean. Now, as I said, I do have reviews for every single film from the Small Axe series. So if you'd like to go ahead and see my thoughts on the individual films, you can do so on my channel. I have a Small Axe playlist. But just to sum up my thoughts on the series overall and why I think it definitely warrants mention here on this list. I mean, this is the epitome of what you guys should be watching during British Black History Month. This is literally, like, I couldn't come up with a better recommendation, truly. This is exactly what you should watch. Small Axe is a series that centers on an aspect of British life that is scarcely ever mentioned, scarcely ever covered in the media. And here not only do we have a mentioning, not only do we have Easter eggs or a reference to this point in Black history in the UK, but we have a whole series of films centered on it, looking at it from all different perspectives. I mean, it's just incredible. And it's done by Steve McQueen, so you know it's going to be good because he's an excellent filmmaker. Now, I will say, as I covered in my reviews of the series from last year, there are definitely the films that I preferred over others, but overall it is a solid series that explores the lives of the Caribbean community in the UK in the late 20th century from all different angles, and I think it really is extraordinary in what it accomplishes. And again, there are some incredible performances in this series, and it sucks, it absolutely sucks that none of them were recognized in the Emmys. Next up for my recommendation, we have a film that comfortably fits into the Black History Month vibe, but also kind of fits into the October vibe in terms of Halloween. So it's kind of like a Halloween recommendation at the same time, and that is Attack the Block. Now, Attack the Block is a 2011 movie that stars John Boyega. This is the film that basically put him on the map, and after seeing it for the first time a few weeks ago in preparation for this video, I absolutely see why. I absolutely see why. The talent oozing here is incredible. Okay, so this isn't strictly just a Black story, but John Boyega's character is at the center of it, and it definitely spotlights Black talent and POC talent brilliantly. So we're going to feature it in this video, and like I said, it fits into the October Halloween vibe as well. Now, this film is about an alien invasion that takes place in a council estate in London, in South London, I believe, and like, yeah. It's literally genius. I don't think I can properly communicate how genius Attack the Block is, okay? Because we have this group of youths. We have these group of delinquents, okay? We are first introduced to them when they're trying to mug Jodie Whittaker's character, who's literally a nurse. So like one of the most sympathetic characters that you could have in anything. They're trying to mug her, and immediately we vilify them because of course they're criminals, they're youths, like, oh, get them off the streets. But then later throughout the film, we realize, you know, just how much of a victim they are of their circumstances. And of course, there's this commentary on police brutality and the way that the police, you know, treat young people from these neighborhoods and how they are biased against them and how these young people feel trapped and they perpetuate this cycle. And we see that represented in the younger characters who look up to the older boys who are a part of this gang, and the older boys are looking up to the even older men who are also part of another gang. So you see this kind of cycle that emerges in these neighborhoods, and that's something that this film exemplifies brilliantly. But then of course you have the group themselves that are led by John Boyega's Moses, and like I said, John Boyega is just so excellent. Like, he really is so perfect. He's this more stoic leader who's been primed to be one of the, you know, top bosses in one of these gangs one day. Like, you can tell that that's something that he's aspiring towards because he can't really see any other way of life, especially being surrounded by the neighborhood and the people within it. But then you also have his friends who have this like loyalty towards him. Again, similarly to what we saw in Rocks, this kind of friendship group with such a loyalty to their leader. And what's really cool to see is that even though these boys do have negative influences that they are looking up to, they act in a heroic manner. Like, they are really good boys, really good people who do the right thing, but understand that the circumstances, their situation in which they have been raised in are really tough, and it's tough to break out of that cycle. And so when you have a character like Moses, he kind of represents what could be. He represents a sense of hope for the community. And this is further emphasized when you have the character of Jodie Whittaker, who again was a victim of mugging by them and finds herself attached to these characters for the sake of survival during this alien invasion. So here Jodie Whittaker's character basically represents the perspective of anyone, everyone who has ever stereotyped, you know, a group of boys or a gang of boys in a council estate, and slowly but surely she realizes that there are more layers and complexity to their circumstances that she needs to be empathetic towards, and also there are more layers to their personality. They're not just, you know, one thing that you may see due to the stereotypes that exist in society. And of course, on top of this, we have the alien invasion itself, which just makes for some really cool action sequences. You can tell that the film was made on a budget, on a very stringent budget, so it's not like a Star Wars film by any stretch of the imagination. It's taking place on this council estate that actually exists in South London, and it's, you know, very restricted in its budget and its special effects and everything, but I still feel like the way that the aliens were kind of materialized was pretty effective. They're really scary and gross, but at the same time not terrifying for those of you who aren't a fan of horror films like myself. Okay? So I really do feel like it's effective on both points, both acting as a vessel for some really intelligent social commentary, albeit sometimes quite on the nose, but then also just a really fun horror film, but not really horror, and that also has some great comedic moments to it and an excellent cast to boot. The next one up, we have Queen of Cutaway. Now, before there was the Queen's Gambit to provide us with a unique perspective on a female chess prodigy, we had Queen of Cutaway, the 2016 film starring Lupita Nyong'o and David Oyelowo that centered on the character of Fiona, who came from Uganda, and she was this math genius who wasn't able to, you know, see her potential due to her poverty, due to living in a slum in Uganda, until her teacher introduced her to chess, and she became obsessed by it, and she discovered her talent for it to the point where she visualized a whole new life for herself and her family based on her talents in this game. Now, I don't know if you heard me the first time, but this film stars Lupita Nyong'o and David Oyelowo. So like that should have been enough. I shouldn't need to keep trying to convince you at that point. Like, you should already be convinced. You should be heading straight to Disney Plus to watch this film as we speak. But just in case you are, just in case you still need a little bit more of a push. Okay, this film is incredible. This film is phenomenal. It is just so emotionally impactful. This is a beautiful story centered on real life events. This real life person who achieved seemingly the impossible and was able to break through barriers like no one's business in this specific field of chess. I mean, this is just an extraordinary story, and unlike Queen's Gambit, like I said, in that case that is a fictional story. Here, this stuff really happened. Now, of course, Lupita Nyong'o is absolutely phenomenal as Fiona's mother. I mean, she just portrays this character who is going through such a difficult time trying to raise her children. She is worried about getting food on their plates and a roof over their head in this really difficult environment. And so when her daughter approaches her with this love for chess, for this game, she doesn't quite understand it, but at the same time she still wants to be there for her daughter. And she's able to see the potential and just how skilled and talented her daughter is in this field. She tries her best to support her despite all of the barriers that come their way. And then you have David Oyelowo, who plays the teacher teacher who sees the spark in Fiona, and he is there to push her forward so that she could potentially make a better life for herself and her family on the basis of what this talent can bring them. But I must also mention the incredible performance given by Medina Lalwanga, who portrays Fiona herself. She is just so incredible as this character who, you know, finds this passion in chess and finds this skill. You see how she grows in confidence in herself and perhaps arrogance as well, but that's to be expected when all of a sudden you realize you have this talent, like you're really gifted at something and everyone's telling you you're doing great. But there are so many lessons that she learns along the way as well, especially when she goes up against chess champions. It's just such a fascinating story to follow. Guys, if you watch The Queen's Gambit, there's no reason there's no reason why you shouldn't have watched Queen of Cartway. I'm so upset by how underrated this film is. It gives me no pleasure to say it's so underrated. Okay, go watch Queen of Cartway immediately. And also what's important to note here is that even though of course the suffering that Fiona's mother goes through in this really tough environment of living in a slum in Uganda is definitely featured here, and it's a part of Fiona's story. It was in real life, so of course it's echoed in the film, but the film itself definitely adopts a more hopeful tone, especially at the end. We see how this gift and talent that Fiona has completely changed her and her family's life, and it's just so beautiful to see at the very end there where we have the actors who portray the real life people and the real life people standing alongside them in the credits. Again, it gives you a more hopeful tone. So again, it goes back to what I said previously with the discussion around rocks and, you know, black suffering. Even though some of that is very much featured in this film, it does have a very hopeful and honest and really emotional tone to it that I think a lot of viewers really appreciate. Okay, so next up we have Noughts and Crosses. Now, Noughts and Crosses is a BBC series that we got last year that is based off of the books by Malorie Blackman. I already did a review of the series last year, so you can check out my review on my channel to get the full discussion of my thoughts on this series. But I'm just gonna say it right here, as I said in my review previously, this series meant everything to me. The fact that this series exists means everything to me because I loved the books by Malorie Blackman. I can't begin to tell you how much those books meant to me as a teenager. I really can't. They were really the it books to be reading during my time. So when I saw that these highly acclaimed books were going to be made into a series, I rejoiced. I genuinely rejoiced. I was like, listen, I don't care if it's bad. I don't care if this series is going to be trash. Like, I hoped it would be good. I really, really did, because it means so much to me. But either way, I was going to watch it. Like, either way, I was going to be there. And honestly, I have to say that I think this series is great. Now, it does have some issues which I outline in my more comprehensive review, but in terms of what I've been saying about the diversification of representation of Black people, I mean, we really don't have another series that exemplifies this more than Noughts and Crosses, because Noughts and Crosses, if you don't know, centers on this alternate reality where Black people, African people, colonized Europe, therefore changing the power dynamics in races across the world. Black people in Europe are at the top. They are at the top of these institutions, and this series, much like the books, explores all of the different ways that society has changed in light of that. And it could be said that it doesn't really go deep enough into just how different society would be if that would be the case, but still I would say that it does do a good job of exploring the wide scope of how racial relations change when you have such a big shift in history. And at the center of this world, we have this Romeo and Juliet style love story, these star-crossed lovers who are never meant to be but fell in love anyways, in Callum and Sephi. And Callum is a white male character and Sephi is the Black female protagonist, and so you have that tension there, of course, with the backdrop of their world creating this impossibility in their relationship. And overall, whilst I don't think that the series quite met the excellence, quite met the brilliance of the books by Malorie Blackman, probably partially because it is a BBC series that was probably limited by its budget, as opposed to it being, say, like a HBO series, a Netflix series where they would have just thrown money at the thing. Oh, it would have been incredible. It would have been phenomenal. But anyways, we got BBC instead, which slightly disappointing. But I still think they did a really good job of realizing this world and giving us the poignant social commentary that made the book so famous. Okay, so next up we have Black Earth Rising. Now, Black Earth Rising is a limited series that centers on the Rwandan genocide that happened in the 1990s. Now, at the center of this story, we have the character of Kate, who is portrayed by Michaela Coel, and I'm just gonna stop right there because once again I shouldn't have to say any more to convince you to check out this show. I said Michaela Coel, did you hear? I said Michaela Coel. But if I still need to go on, then I will. So we have the character of Kate, who is portrayed by Michaela Coel, and she herself is Rwandan, but she was adopted by a white woman who is a legal prosecutor who is involved in the case of the Rwandan genocide and the perpetrators of it in the international courts. So there's this really interesting mother-daughter relationship that is explored throughout this series between Kate and her adoptive mother, because Kate is experiencing a ton of PTSD and identity issues as a result of having been born into the Rwandan genocide and having experienced these horrific, terrifying events at the early stage of her life. This has still impacted her into her adulthood, and so there's a tension there between her and her mother, on top of the fact that of course she is adopted and that always comes with its challenges, but this creates a whole new angle in terms of the challenges that are presented here. And on top of all of this, you have this massive conspiracy, you have this massive mystery surrounding international law, how the international courts work and how they have a certain bias towards countries, and how the international courts' definition of world criminals seems to vary depending on which country they're from. Like, all of these topics are explored brilliantly and intelligently throughout this series, whilst also spotlighting one of the most horrendous events to have ever happened in African and indeed global history. And in particular, as someone who studied international law in law school, I feel like this really hit home because it addresses a lot of the concerns that I already saw present while studying the topic. I mean, we already talked about the kind of inequality and inequity when it comes to the international courts of justice, but here in this series we see explored the very real impact of those inequalities, on top of course exploring the topic of European intervention in African politics. But you know, that's a story for another day. My next recommendation is A United Kingdom. Now, remember how I said that the discussion surrounding European intervention in African politics is a story for another day? Yeah, apparently today is that day. Apparently today is still that day, because this film is basically centered on that very topic. Now, this film is once again based off of real life events, and it stars once again David Oyelowo and Rosamund Pike as the characters of Seretse and Ruth. And these two were real life people who fell in love in the UK in the early 20th century, but this was a much contested relationship because Seretse was the son of a chief, I believe. His uncle was kind of the acting chief at the time because his father had died, but he was being prepared to take on the role as chief of his village. And Ruth was this English woman who fell in love with him, and they ended up getting married despite the wishes of literally everyone. You want to talk about star-crossed lovers? Literally everyone was against this relationship, and there was a lot of political friction around this relationship as well, and how it would reflect on South Africa's upcoming policy of apartheid. Because if you had this high-profile relationship between this African chief and this English rose of a woman, that would go against the principles of hatred and racism and inequality that supported the apartheid policies in South Africa. Now, I haven't really been mentioning the directors of these films that are featured on this list, although I hope I had the sense to include the directors on screen somewhere throughout this video. But I do just want to mention that this film is directed by Ama Asante, who is a black female female director who is originally from Ghana, I believe, and she also directed a film that was featured on my list from last year in Belle, which starred Gugu Mbatha Raw. And this film also centered on an interracial relationship in history and was also based off of real life events. And I feel like that's something that Ama Asante often dips her toe into. She seems to be into that sort of thing, and she's good at telling these stories for the most part. I did see When Hands Touch, and like, yeah, When Hands Touch is not giving what these two are giving, okay? But I would say with the United Kingdom, even though at first I wasn't quite convinced by the romance between the two characters, I felt like it was a bit shaky. I didn't really feel the connection between David Oyelowo and Rosamund Pike at first. But throughout the film, you see the dedication that they have for their relationship, how they're able to just push through no matter what the odds, and the odds are dour. The odds are awful. The odds are stacked against them. And keep in mind that this love story is taking place with the backdrop of colonialism, of British control of a lot of countries around the world, but here most specifically in what's known today as Botswana. And like I said, you have a lot of exploration of the, you know, exploitation of peoples in these colonized lands, as well as seeing the inner workings of how control over these lands looked like, even when these countries were told that they had, you know, some sort of power of self-governance. In actuality, a lot of the power was out of their hands and was still centered in Westminster. We see how easily it was taken away from them when they didn't comply to British rule, and just how precarious that whole situation was, especially in light of the discovery of important minerals and oil and all of these precious resources that the land had. And honestly, what was just so shocking and profound for me was to see how little has changed. Like, literally nothing has changed. If you know anything about African politics and you watch this film, you're like, oh, right. Nothing has changed. Because when you see the deal that is made between Seretse and the UK government, there are a lot of deals happening like that right now as we speak, to the detriment of these countries. And really, it's just so heartbreaking to see how this exploitation continues on. And lastly, for my final recommendation for what you guys should absolutely check out this British Black History Month, we have Beasts of No Nation. Now, oh gosh, here's the thing about this film. I've known about this film for a while now. I've been meaning to see it for like years and years. Like, literally, this film came out in, I believe, 2016 or 15, and it stars Idris Elba, of course, a Black British icon. But I have been meaning to watch this film for a very long time. The only thing that stopped me was the subject matter itself, and knowing that once I saw this, it would absolutely break me. Like, I would be broken into pieces. And the subject matter at hand is that of child soldiers in Africa. Specifically, this centers on, I believe, a civil war that took place in Sierra Leone, but this story has been echoed throughout all different types of countries in Africa and indeed the world. I, for one, am more familiar with the stories of child soldiers in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I'm from. It's just such an emotionally gut-wrenching topic to even think about, to even try to wrap your mind around. So I knew that watching a 2-hour plus film about it would just leave me feeling broken, shattered, broken, hopeless, okay? But I do think that it is worth the watch. Like, I can't even express just how excellent this film really is. So first of all, let's discuss the story. So this film centers on a young boy called Agu who lives in this unspecified West African country. Again, you know, these circumstances are applicable to a variation of African countries and indeed countries around the world. So I think it makes sense that the country itself is unspecified, just to give it a sense of universality and to have it apply to just thousands upon thousands of people around the world. But when we first meet Agu, he is living in a very impoverished area. You know, his family are struggling, but at the same time, his father has this kind of courage and has this determination to help people who are struggling worse than them, because there is a civil war taking place and there are all of these refugees coming to their village, and his father wants to house these refugees on his land and just take care of as many people as possible, until one day the opposing forces take over. They invade his village, and Agu's life is flipped right upside down. He's left without his family, having been separated from his mother, who managed to escape to a safer region, and his father and his older brother, who were killed by the rebels. And then he ends up in the middle of a forest where he is kidnapped by this other rebel group who's led by Idris Elba's character, and they have a ton of these child soldiers. They go ahead and adopt him as one of them, and that's where the story kind of begins, and we follow Agu's journey through this new existence that he is forced into, this idea that this innocent child who was just playing around with a broken TV, he had his friends, and yes, he had the struggle in his village and everything, but he was just a child. He was just a child, he was just innocent, and should have never even been around such violence, let alone being made to perpetuate it. But the circumstances of this civil war land him in one of the worst, most horrifying situations that you could ever imagine, where he is forced to do things that would leave adults just shaken and broken and just completely distressed. And as a child himself, he is scarred for life. Seeing the way that he is brainwashed, the way that he is indoctrinated to fight as part of this war that is just so pointless, that is just so corrupt, and just so like the fact that these poor young people, these kids, are forced to be a part of such a pointless, broken system, it just makes you so angry. And then you have Idris Elba's character. Idris Elba in this film, oh my god, Idris Elba in this film, why wasn't he nominated? Let's talk about this for a second, okay? Idris Elba should have been nominated for insert award here. Like, really, just insert award here. He should have won insert award here, because truly he is phenomenal in this film. He is one of the most despicable villains in all of film ever. In all of film ever. How was he not nominated? How? Now, I will say that this film was from 2015, and this was back in the day. I don't know if you guys remember, but back in the day before Netflix became the award season powerhouse that it has become in recent years. So this film, even though it did get a little bit of recognition, I remember, wasn't quite at the forefront of the conversation as it should have been. And I feel like if it was released today with the full backing of Netflix's like bottomless pockets, these literal bottomless pits of pockets, okay, it would definitely reach up to the top in terms of awards recognition, because it is truly incredible. And by the way, just as a side note, speaking of directors, this film is directed by Cary Fukunaga, who just directed No Time to Die, and I feel like this is one of his best works yet. But anyways, back to Idris Elba's character. So he is the commandant. He is basically the commander of this regiment, I guess it would be called, of these young soldiers. And the thing is, you know, one of the reasons why having child soldiers is just so abhorrent, it's just so evil and despicable, is that children are incredibly impressionable. Like, children absorb the world like sponges, and whatever you tell them, they will come to believe as they get older. And so the brainwashing starts early here. I mean, that is the intention, is to brainwash these children from a very young age, to mold them in the way that he needs them to be molded in order to follow his direction without question, and he can get them to do whatever he needs them to do. And when I say that he asks horrific things from these children, I can't even discuss it really without just feeling so sick to my stomach. And like I said, this does very much mirror real life events, even though the story takes place in this kind of unspecified country in West Africa. For example, I know from Congolese history that one of our previous presidents, Joseph Kabila the Senior, used to have child soldiers as bodyguards himself. And again, it's this idea that you can brainwash them into doing whatever you need them to do. They will have absolute loyalty to you and you alone. Now, I will say, if this sounds like a really, really tough watch, which it absolutely is, at the very end, there is a little bit of a hopeful note, a hopeful ending to it. So it's not as dour as you may think. But like I said, it is a really tough watch. And I would say that before going in, just prepare yourself emotionally for a really tough but emotionally moving within 2.5 hours. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my recommendations for what to watch this British Black History Month, it's time for you guys to let me know what your recommendations are down in the comments below, or what you guys will be seeing from my list if you do end up watching any of these recommendations. I'd love to hear it. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.